Michael, the straw falls on you to share your presentation. Are you ready to do so?
I think I am.
Go for it.
Okay. Is that visible?
It is visible, yes, and we can hear you clearly. Take it away.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those of you who were here yesterday will have already heard my introduction to myself. So I will skip over that. Today, I also have the benefit of assistance from Elizabeth McQuarrie and Zach Kazzaz, who you would doubtless remember from the presentation that's just finished. And I'm hoping that Adrian Hope-Baile, who I can see lurking there in the background, will be available both to introduce himself and to offer me much needed assistance as it becomes necessary.
Yeah, so I'm here. Hi everyone, Adrian Hope-Baile from Untitled Chapter. I'm going to use on my videos with my newly adorned Mojaloop background. It took me hours to figure out how to make that not appear backwards, by the way. Anyhow, yeah, good to be here, and thanks, Michael, for doing all the hard work at Ssnapp.
Well, thank you. And you will notice that as I was idly leafing through the advice to presenters, I just noticed a thing that said, "Don't wear a white shirt." But sad to say, too late. Anyway, so let's get going. We've been thinking for some time now as a community about how we ought to manage connections between Mojaloop networks and other networks. Obviously, that's going to be very important for not only for us, but for all kinds of schemes. We think it's quite unlikely that there will be an eventual world-dominating interoperability scheme, much more likely, and particularly in the short to medium term, that there will be quite large numbers of schemes of different kinds, which will need to find a way of interoperating with each other. Now, this is, if you like, the second level of interoperability. The level we started working on, the level Mojaloop started at, is interoperating between individual systems, banks, mobile money systems, those sorts of things. But as those institutions start to organize themselves into schemes, it's going to become more important for those schemes to be able to interoperate with each other. So we're starting to move now in the direction of finding ways for that to happen. Now, we started off, sorry, excuse me, I'm just trying to wrestle my machine into submission. We started off mostly thinking about the connections between Mojaloop networks and how that would work. But it's gradually become clear to us that there's a more immediate opportunity, and indeed a more immediate need, to be able to connect Mojaloop networks to non-Mojaloop networks. So that's where we've been spending our time in the most recent past. And that's really what this presentation is mostly about. So the problem that we presented ourselves with then was to say, how could we find a way for non-Mojaloop networks to connect to Mojaloop networks? There needed to be one that was simple, easy to implement, but which was capable of extension and generalization so that it could form part of a more general network of networks, interaction between schemes. So, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? It's essentially to allow a non-Mojaloop system to connect to a Mojaloop scheme and to support the following simple use cases. Essentially, person-to-person or person-to-business transfers from non-Mojaloop schemes to a customer in a Mojaloop scheme, or from a customer in the Mojaloop scheme to a customer who is reachable through the non-Mojaloop scheme. The interesting point about this, of course, is that if we did nothing and imagined a situation where there was a Mojaloop scheme that had two non-Mojaloop schemes attached to it, it would in principle be possible for customers in one of those non-Mojaloop schemes to send funds to customers in the other Mojaloop scheme via the Mojaloop scheme. We need to do a bit of thinking, I think, to decide whether that's a use case that we want to support. But for the moment, I just leave it hanging to say that's something that would be possible, given the set of thinking that we're doing at the moment. So I want to talk about a simple core example here. We want to use a concept which we call a cross-network provider, which is a role, as we're defining it, which enables interactions between a Mojaloop scheme and external institutions that the cross-network provider represents to the Mojaloop scheme. Now, when I say we're thinking of that as a role, what I mean is that we wouldn't want to preclude the idea that the institution that had that role might also be a fully fledged participant in the Mojaloop scheme, that it might have accounts of its own, that it might support transfers to other institutions within the Mojaloop scheme. But as in its role as a cross-network provider, it represents the various non-Mojaloop account holders that you see on the right-hand side of the slide, which include, coincidentally, an outfit called Snazzy Mobile Money System. So let's look at how this would work, we think. A customer of the Mojaloop DFSP says, I want to send $100 to this phone number. As we saw yesterday, goes through to the switch, goes to the ALS. The ALS says, no, I don't know about that phone number. But now the switch asks itself the question, are there any other ways apart from the address lookup service that I might use to find out where this phone number is? So it will ask the non-Mojaloop cross-network provider. Now, the cross-network provider now responds and says, yes, I can route that. I will route it to this transaction account and this eventual destination, Snazzy Mobile Money Systems. And it will probably ask to see some form of Know Your Customer, or CDD as I must now learn to call it, confirmation. Now, we don't think that we will specify how the cross-network provider does this. Providers will have their own ways of doing that. They might, for instance, contact their subscriber institutions and ask if anyone recognizes it. They might use a third-party lookup like Pathfinder to find out whether that phone number is registered to someone who is in their network. We don't mind. As far as we are concerned, as far as the Mojaloop switch is concerned, cross-network provider will just come back as if it owned that account. So that then goes back to the originator and it says, yes, you can route this payment to me and here is where to send it, i.e. the non-Mojaloop cross-network provider. So now it will ask for the payment to go ahead. Payment goes to the cross-network provider again, and the cross-network provider will then respond and say, okay, I transferred those funds, you can rely on me. Now, there isn't any obvious way for the Mojaloop switch to know that the cross-network provider has in fact transferred those funds to the Snazzy Mobile Money System. But on the other hand, there is no way for a switch to know whether any DFSP who's attached to a Mojaloop scheme has in fact transferred the funds to their customer, except that the customers will complain eventually if funds don't reach where they're supposed to. So we leave that aside for the moment. And the final response is that the cross-network provider gets essentially a response from the switch that says the Moja DFSP on the left-hand side owes you $100 US. Now, the interesting point about this is that presumably in the non-Mojaloop network, those funds will have cleared not only to Snazzy mobile money system, but to the customer who is the eventual recipient, who is a customer of Snazzy mobile money system. Now, as you know, our principles say funds should clear immediately, and that's what we're expecting to happen. But depending on the scheme, settlement may not happen until end of day, or half an hour from now, or an hour from now. So essentially, one of the things that we will be asking is for the cross-network provider to make the same sort of commitment as a Mojaloop participant makes, i.e. to clear funds to its customer in advance of being reimbursed in the process of settlement. However, for a cross-network provider, that may be a more complicated and potentially expensive commitment, because they have large numbers of organizations that are attached to them and large numbers of terms on which they deal with those organizations. Again, I'm going to leave that for the moment and say, well, so what are the issues that we've got here? First of all, cross-network provider will need to support a subset of operations, and they don't need to support all of the operations that a DFSP does, but we will talk about what it does need to do. Second, cross-network provider will need to make some kind of credible commitment to the Mojaloop scheme that it has in fact transferred those funds to a known account at a known financial institution within a specified time. And we mean by that independently known. So we want some means of attesting to that, which doesn't simply rely on the good faith of the cross-network provider, but which can be independently checked. Third, the cross-network provider will need to provide reliable information to support its regulatory compliance requirements, and it will need to have a way of asking for that information from DFSPs, because if a DFSP in the Mojaloop scheme wants to send funds to someone in a fund that's, an FI that's attached to a cross-network provider, they will need to have some way of knowing that they need to include some sort of compliance information when they send the transfer. Cross-network provider will also need to participate in the Mojaloop settlement process, and the schemes regulators, at least, will need to be comfortable with all of these arrangements. It may not, of course, just be the schemes regulators. It may be that the cross-network provider's own regulators will have a view on this. So I want to go through these in some more detail. So first of all, what parts of the current API will a cross-network provider have to support? Well, it'll have to issue and respond to requests to identify customers. If the funds are being transferred to its customers, it will have to respond to the request. If their customers want to send to someone in the Mojaloop scheme, they will have to send requests. It will have to issue quotation requests and respond to them in the way that I defined when I went through the anatomy of a transfer yesterday. And it will also, of course, need to be able to inquire what the status of a quotation is if, for instance, it decides it's waited too long to get a response. Then it will have to issue transfer requests where its customers are paying a customer in the Mojaloop network, or respond to transfer requests where its customers are being paid by a customer. And again, it will have to inquire after the status of a transfer. Things that we don't think it will have to cover, at least in the first instance, are maintaining directories in the ALS via the participants resource. Now, that's because, as I said before, we assume that the cross-network provider will have its own ways of responding, and it won't be using the address lookup service in the scheme to manage that. We don't think, at least in the first instance, it will need to support merchant requests to pay, or requests for authorization, or bulk payments, or PISP payments, which are service provider, payment service provider payments like Alipay or Google Pay. i.e. people who can initiate payments but who aren't themselves account holders. So those are areas of the API that we are currently excluding from needing to, well, from thinking about in relation to how connection to a non-Mojaloop scheme will work. We're just restricting ourselves to the straight transfer of funds. So now let's look at questions of attesting to funds transfer and, coincidentally, providing KYC information, because it turns out that these converge with each other quite nicely. So first of all, we want to insist that a cross-network provider which provides a gateway to a non-Mojaloop network can only transfer to what we call approved accounts, i.e. approved by Mojaloop. And that specifically excludes over-the-counter transfers and what are called transfers to unregistered, where, pardon me, in a number of mobile money systems, you have a situation where you can send money to a customer who belongs to that mobile network operator, even if they don't belong to the mobile money system. And effectively, they get a message that says, Michael has sent you $100. You can pick this up if you join the mobile money system within 14 days, typically. Now, this is a powerful way for mobile money systems in particular to attract new customers. Because essentially, if they can persuade people to send money to people who aren't yet registered, then those people will have to register in order to get the funds, and the hope is that they will become upstanding citizens of the mobile money system thereafter. So we expect that the cross-network providers will not support funds of both of those kinds. And these requirements, we expect, will form part of the rules under whose terms the cross-network provider is allowed to join the Mojaloop scheme. Now, sorry, my machine has unfrozen itself. When a cross-network provider receives a request for a quotation, then it needs to include in its response to that, its positive response to that, enough information to enable the Mojaloop scheme to identify the account that will eventually be credited with the funds. And as I said before, this will be independently to identify, to have some other way, other than just the assurances provided by the cross-network provider, that there really is such an institution and such an account at that institution to which the funds will be credited. So this is a warrant on behalf of the CMP, on the part of the CMP, that it will do those, transfer those funds in accordance with the requirements of the scheme. It's not an immediate guarantee of transfer, because effectively all the cross-network provider is saying is, trust me when I tell you, I did this. But it does provide evidence of a commitment that can be independently verified, and it can be made a condition of participation in the scheme by the scheme rules. So what does a reliable identification of an account include? Well, we would expect it to be a scheme-independent identifier for the DFSP that owns that account. A BIC, business identification code, would be an obvious example of that. And insofar as there might be more than one, we would also need an identifier type that said what kind of identifier this was. Similarly, we need an identifier for the transaction account, which will be the eventual recipient of the funds. That should be of an approved type. And those types might include IBAN or phone number for a mobile money system, or possibly account number. We will also need an identifier type for that to say what kind of thing it is. And we expect also a statement of the timetable within which the cross-network provider warrants to clear the funds. Now, we've said a number of times yesterday and today that Mojaloop supports immediate clearance of funds. But when we move into a situation where funds may be being transferred across national boundaries and things like that, it's not infrequently the case that it costs considerably more to send immediately than it costs, let's say, to send in 24 hours or sometimes in 3 days. So we wanted to leave open the possibility that schemes might support cross-network providers who would say, well, I will transfer the funds as cheaply as I can, but that means they won't be available to your customer, or to my customer, to the beneficiary, immediately. You will have to wait some period, but on the other hand, you will be able to save funds as a consequence of that. So finally then, the process of the transfer itself is the same as it was before, except that when the cross-network provider returns the fulfillment, the participant will accept, and indeed the scheme will accept, that this is a warranty that the funds have actually been transferred. Now, what we would like the cross-network provider to do would be to include that information as part of its response to the request for quotation, and to sign that using its private key in the same way as it does all the other parts of the terms of the quotation, so that these guarantees will form part of the cross-network provider's warranty that these are the terms under which the transfer will be made. So that's that side of things. That's the sort of thing we would like to do. Now, actually, this maps rather nicely onto a thing called the travel rule. For those of you who haven't come across this before, this is mandated in the USA, but only for high value payments. I mean, very large payments in the world of real-time retail payment systems. And it's required to be included in the payment instruction. It's actually a relatively simple thing. Essentially, for both parties, it needs to include the full name, the address, the account identifier, and the financial institution. As well as that, it needs the amount of the transfer and the execution date of the transfer. Now, as you can doubtless see, the account identifier and financial institution we already wanted to know for both parties. The execution date of the transfer, i.e. when the transfer will actually happen, we wanted to know. The amount of the transfer, obviously, we know already. So that only really leaves the full name and address. Now, there may be problems in some areas with addresses, because although some customers for these systems will have reasonably identifiable addresses, there are other customers, particularly in rural areas in less developed countries, where addresses may not be as detailed and reliable as they would otherwise be. However, it would really be up to the KYC process in those jurisdictions. I think, sorry, I'm going to call it the CDD process now, to ensure that participants in their networks were holding that information at a level that was acceptable. So, there are some issues around how accounts might be identified. We've tended, Mojaloop I mean, to deprecate the use of actual account identifiers in favor of aliases, because they might be used to gain fraudulent access to the accounts, and in some jurisdictions there are potentially onerous privacy requirements if people are storing, and recipient DFSPs are storing information that might be construed as personal information. So direct identification of accounts is a risky process in some cases. However, the use of aliases is a different kind of risk. You need to be able to understand what the actual transaction account that's represented by an alias is. And that's obviously to stop situations like the one where I go and register 47 different aliases in order to have someone send, or people send amounts of money to those different aliases, thereby circumventing anti-money laundering rules that say if you get a certain amount of deposit into a certain account, then it's got to be reported to the AML compliance authority. The worry is that if you have an actual, if you say, in order to understand an alias, I need to understand the transaction account to which it refers, then you're back with the first problem. So that's an issue that we will need to think about, and we will need to find some way of making sure that that is manageable for transfers that might go quite some distance across jurisdictions. So the plan then is that the cross-network provider will include a travel rule object in the transaction object, i.e. the terms with which it responds to the request for quotation. And it will form part of the information from which the cryptographic lock is generated. This should, we think, ensure that the veracity of the information can be tested independently in case there's a dispute. And scheme operators will be able to say to cross-network providers, if they fail to meet those requirements, look, you said you were going to transfer to this account. We've asked the people who own this account, and they say they never got it from you. What's going on? Which, at least in the first instance, is probably as far as we can go. So that covers questions about attesting to the bona fides of a transfer. I want to talk a little bit now about settling. I'm going to be talking about settlements, curiously, later on today, so let me give you a trailer. Don't miss this presentation, it's fantastic. So basically, Mojaloop divides settling into two parts. Funds clear immediately, as you know, but actually no funds have yet moved between the institutions that participate in the transfer. All that's happened is that the payee institution has used some of its money to credit the eventual customer. And it's done that on the basis that it will be reimbursed for those funds as part of the process of settlement. Payee in this context is the cross-network provider. Now, the switch records the obligation that the payer, DFSP, has to the cross-network provider. But each scheme will have its own specific mechanism for settling these obligations. Mojaloop deliberately doesn't specify or require a particular method of settling. And in particular, it doesn't concern itself with what I want to call the actual mechanisms of settlement. Now, by that I mean things like what kinds of account are participants allowed or required to use for settlements? What mechanisms are used to make transfers between those accounts? Is it an RTGS where you can send a message saying, please transfer these funds? Is it different accounts in a commercial bank where you can ask the bank to make the transfer? Question, do they contain commercial bank funds or central bank funds? And are they reserved for settlement, or can they be used for other purposes? Now, there are so many ways, different ways in which these questions can be answered in various schemes, that we don't concern ourselves with those mechanisms of settlement. All that the Mojaloop scheme does is to record the obligations of parties in relation to each other and to report on those to administrators, scheme administrators, on request. And it will also, as you'll see later on this afternoon, support different ways of settling. We think the major ways in which schemes of various kinds settle around the world today. So, we currently expect that a CMP, cross-network provider, will participate in the settlement processes which the Mojaloop scheme in which they participate supports. Currently, Mojaloop assumes that every participant in the settlement will be an account holder, or will at least have access to settlement accounts. So the options are cross-network provider could either join whatever settlement structure there is there, but that might be problematic, particularly if the scheme uses central bank funds. Now, when we talk about cross-network providers, we might very easily be talking about institutions, for instance, like Western Union, like TerraPay, who it would be quite unlikely to be allowed to open central bank accounts, and therefore would find it impossible directly to settle in schemes that use central bank funds. Alternatively, they might form an arrangement with a DFSP which does belong to the scheme to provide settlement services on its behalf. Or alternatively, we might look at creating a specialized arrangement to allow the cross-network provider to participate in settlements using its own bank accounts and in a different way from the normal settlement model. We think that probably the second of these is the most likely candidate. So now I'm going to come over to the question of regulatory considerations, and I'm going to pass over to Elizabeth, who's been sitting patiently, waiting for her chance to shine, which I am now happy to give her.
Michael, thank you. And I want to say that what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is really sort of the findings or the products, the thoughts of an exercise that we conducted since the last convening to really think more deeply about what are the regulatory considerations for Mojaloop as it goes cross-border, right? So that's what's really the focus here. And I want to give a big shout out to Michael for walking me, Zach, and Chris through what I would describe as Mojaloop for Dummies. Thank you. We were paying attention. And
I never doubted it.
So a lot of these considerations that we're going to mention have been touched upon by Michael. We want to give you some background on why we think they're important. And I think you still have the control, Michael. So.
I do, I'm afraid. So just shout out and I'll...
Perfect. Yeah, so Michael pointed out that, there's this travel rule piece. And the travel rule is something from the US regulation. It's from the Bank Secrecy Act. And it has primarily been applied to high value transactions, all true. But regulation, cross-border, US or otherwise, is primarily a risk-based approach. The regulator says, okay, DFSP, you have more risk, you need to be more active. So the travel rule has been more expansively applied to other needs. It can apply to US financial institutions not in the US. It can apply to US financial institutions settling for other institutions that, some of these may be around the world, not just in the US. And I want to point out that in a project I was involved in at the US Federal Reserve some years ago, that even though we were talking about ACH, Automated Clearinghouse, where I was working at the time, that OFAC came to the US ACH rule setting body called NACHA and said, you need to apply the travel rule to all payments that are cross-border in the ACH network. So that was much more than high value transactions. So it can be applied and interpreted rather expansively. So we need to be aware and concerned about getting this information. And typically it's also meant to say that any financial intermediary which touches the transaction should also be identified in the payment record. So this is information about the sender and receiver, full name and address, as well as identification of financial correspondents, CNPs, or other entities, settling entities that touch the transaction, that this information be included in the record end to end. So we're thinking that this is important for Mojaloop to be able to accommodate these. They're not formally requirements, but these risk-based needs that many regulators are asking for. And we also picked up on this issue of wire stripping. So this is the concept that information could be altered midstream as the payment goes from intermediary to intermediary. And one of the, I think, amazing aspects of Mojaloop is that wire stripping is actually not, possible when the payment cannot be repudiated. So this is awesome, but when we get to CNP providers, it's our understanding that the concept of non-repudiation is not possible. So this becomes a concern that we want to keep in mind. If I could ask you to go to the next one, Michael.
You may.
Thank you, please. So just to ask a couple of questions, throw some illustrations out here about what we're really thinking that we should keep in mind is, how do we make sure that the information that the travel rule needs about the sender and the receiver is entered in the beginning? And also there's a question in many jurisdictions about making sure you distinguish when a transaction is going cross-border. Because remember that on some level, these transactions, when they're cross-border, will be intermingled with domestic transactions in a domestic scheme. Some of them will also exit and become cross-border. So we want to make sure we find a way to accommodate this. And Michael, if the next one, please. And the question of the CNP data, we want to make sure or have some assurance that the data is not being manipulated at the CNP level. Of course, not to malign any particular CNP here. It's just a link in our chain, and we want to ensure the integrity of the transaction at this level as well. And Michael, if I could ask you to go to the next. And then the question of the CNPs actually settling and doing transactions through the life cycle here. So we want to be able to differentiate between the CNPs, volume and traffic, transfers, messages, from any sort of proxy participant here, proxy DFSP. So by that, we know that in an ideal world, we want the CNP to be able to be a direct participant in a Mojaloop scheme. What we don't know is if that will always be possible, either at the messaging level or at the settlement level. And a regulatory, expensive regulatory perspective would want to be able to say, okay, this is from this participant and this is from the other participant, whether they're direct or indirect. So if we could keep, if you will, an eye out for how we can facilitate this, it would be helpful. I think there's one or two more slides, if you would, Michael. Thank you. So how can we, ensure that the CNP is also a upstanding actor in our Mojaloop scheme? So, there's a variety of ways we could do that. We could look at having a scheme entity, certainly as a suggestion here, perform some sort of minimum level of due diligence on the CNPs, because they're not going to come into our scheme, our Mojaloop, on the same basis for cross-border as with our domestic scheme. So could we look and maintain licenses on file, have them be required to notify if they have any fines or suspensions, something or actions which tend to ensure or should ensure the integrity of our scheme. What sort of rule-based audits might we have for the CMPs? And of course, is there any sort of third-party verification service that we could employ to ensure the integrity of the address data that the CNP messages have in them? These are open questions of how we could work to ensure the integrity of our Mojaloop schemes as they are deployed around the world. I think we have one more slide, Michael. Thank you. So as Michael has already indicated, that is the proposal to the community that the data in the transfer about the full, sender and receiver and their information and the financial intermediaries, I want to put that in there as a really important piece too, should be included on an end-to-end basis. We need to work to ensure that that is there for all cross-border payments. That's not to say that the next cross-border schemes that we work with for Mojaloop are going to require this, but probably the next one will. As we get bigger and bigger, these are going to become more important issues for regulators as they look at Mojaloop. If we could explore whether non-repudiability can be present for the CMP actors as well, that would, I think, assuage concerns about wire stripping, which of course, when it's a domestic implementation, is not not a concern in Mojaloop, which is, I think, a really important asset for this type of scheme. But we lose that in the cross-border. And the other potential option that we're proposing is whether or not the participation requirements for CNPs should be part of a core rule set as a suggestion, or the reference rule set to ensure or attempt to ensure that these, that we get everybody in the community becomes an upstanding actor, whether it's a domestic scheme or we go to cross-border. And obviously that's something that the entire community should be concerned about as we scale. So we're sort of asking questions here, making suggestions, and hope to continue this dialogue with Michael as long as he can continue the Mojaloop for Dummies interpretation. So I appreciate that.
That's the only interpretation I understand, I'm afraid, Elizabeth. As soon as you graduate from Mojaloop to Dummies, you're going to have to find someone else to talk to.
Okay.
Elizabeth, I have a quick question on, I think one clarification I'd like to make is that non-repudiability and tamper resistance are actually orthogonal concerns. In one case, you're saying that the source of the message, independent of its content, came from a certain party, and that party cannot say they did not send it. That's what non-repudiability is. Whereas tamper resistance is something separate. Wire stripping falls under tamper resistance, not really under non-repudiability. And so I would have said that we address the condition of tamper resistance directly in the interledger protocol, where we sign the contents of the transaction end to end. And once that's been done, and all details of the intermediaries have been secured by that signature, Mojaloop will refuse to clear that transaction if any of those details have been changed. It's fundamental to the design of the system. Separately, the messages themselves that are conducted between the participants in the Mojaloop scheme carry what's called a JWS signature. That's a it's a fancy name that means JSON web signature, or I believe that's right anyway. The purpose of that is to say that message, regardless of its contents, came from a known party. That is, it carries their, it was signed in a public key, private key pair system where we can verify the source of that message. It says separately that the message itself was not modified since it was signed, but it doesn't necessarily say that that the details themselves are in any way meaningful to the application. That's a separate concern. That's where interledger comes in. So those two things kind of fit together, but it would be possible for a intermediary, for example, to accept a fraudulent or tampered message, sign it and send it on and say, yeah, I sent that fraudulent message on, and someone came back later and said, but that thing was fraudulent. And they could say, well, I don't know, I just passed on whatever he handed me. So what we want to say really is that there's a binding of who it was that initiated the interledger signature that serves as the security around the transaction details, and that they can't repudiate that they actually did that signing. And so the JWS serves as the sort of unbroken channel for that message all the way through, but that the interledger protocol is the thing that gives us the end-to-end guarantee. And I think one of the things the CNP group is working on is how exactly do we ensure that we have that end-to-end interledger guarantee where we might be flowing through 2 or 3 systems, and each system wants to have its own interledger guarantee that is somewhat independent of the end-to-end concerns. And I think that's still an open question, although I defer to Adrian and Michael on that point. They may have made some more progress since then. I hope my clarification hasn't opened up another question in your mind about how this concern of wire stripping might be dealt with. I think I think this takes care of it, but I'm not sure. And it sounds to me like something that the travel rule and wire stripping together should guide the way in which we think about the connecting of the schemes together. So I really appreciate your calling it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that clarification, Miller, was as clear as my coffee this morning. So I'll have to refocus
Sorry.
on that. You know, but you're right, that what we're really trying to do is surface concerns, really potential concerns about the scalability of our schemes of Mojaloop as it becomes bigger and more widely accepted, because these things are going to come up. It was not an issue in the US ACH network before it tried to scale. OFAC never contacted the US ACH network about anything until it tried to go global.
Isn't that usually the case too, isn't it? As soon as it becomes valuable, then the tax authority and the regulators all show up to make sure it's taken care of. They don't deal with small fry. But I think you're right to call this out for us and say, you know, deal with it now in the fundamental design of the system, so that as you do face these, you're not saying you're never going to have those conversations. Of course you would, but the answer should be that we've designed in for many of those concerns up front, and makes it easier to tailor the system into those environments.
And just one final comment that, you know, the CNP, while they can be incredible partners in growing our system or growing and scaling our approach here, the regulator in general does not look upon them as having the same validity as a DFSP who has higher compliance obligations. So anything we can do to ensure the integrity of all the CMPs in the system is to our advantage.
It would be helpful too.
I'm going to jump in here.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Miller. We're about 10 minutes past our time. I want to jump here and just take a note and say that we have one question in the chat from Esteban. Elizabeth or Michael, if you want to respond to that on text, that would be great. And then Michael and Elizabeth, I'll give you guys a minute to wrap up, and then we can move on to the next session.
Michael.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so oops, that went well, didn't it? So what should a cross-network provider do? It should implement the API described, include a travel rule data structure in the transaction object, and we will also need to look at how it would settle via a proxy who's a settling member of the Mojaloop scheme, and how it would abide by the rules of a Mojaloop scheme. And we would like to propose for the next PI that an objective might be to build a proof of concept of a Mojaloop switch interacting with a non-Mojaloop cross-network provider, either a real one if we can find some willing volunteers to be sawn in half, or a fictitious one if we can't. And that is the end of the presentation. A mere 10 minutes late. My apologies, Simeon. Actually, my apologies, Elizabeth, because I think I ate your lunch.
That's all right. Thank you so much, Michael. I just want to point out again that we have 3 questions in the Q&A section.
I'll pick them up right now. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Cool. And I will now stop sharing.
Awesome. We have our next panelists here with us. That is Maria Clara and Amitabh Saxena. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not, I apologize for that. Who will talk about the Central Bank of Brazil versus WhatsApp Pay. That should be interesting. Maria and Amitabh, take it away.
Well, hi, everyone. Good morning here in Washington, D.C. My name is Amitabh. I'm the head of product for Digital Disruptions. And we've already heard Maria. She's our head of user experience. She's based in Cape Town. We're very much looking forward to presenting this session. We're very excited about this particular market of Brazil. It's one I think that isn't talked about a lot in the Mojaloop community. One that both Maria and I have experience in. I previously used to work at MasterCard. I was heading up mobile money for Latin America. Brazil was probably the most important market for us at that time. Maria is Brazilian, so she has the most amount of credibility on this topic, and she's going to be actually delving into the heart of the matter. Just a quick overview of us, because we're still relatively new to the Mojaloop community. We started joining this year. We started a consulting firm about 6.5 years ago. We're based in the US. We combine both strategy and design, and we particularly focus on innovation from a methodological perspective, and we focus on the payments and DFS sector from a domain perspective, and we go end to end, both from kind of early stage strategy all the way to launch. And on the side, we also do some payments research and training on different innovation methodologies. And we've been really fortunate to work with a number of both public sector and private sector players, and probably a lot of which are familiar to this group over here. So on the main slide, this quote, "We don't want a WeChat," is attributed to the president of the Central Bank of Brazil, actually earlier this year, when he was discussing different models. And I think everyone is familiar with the WeChat super app platform in China, and it's something that Brazil was pretty adamant not to have. And as probably a lot of us know, WhatsApp Pay came into Brazil about a month ago. So we thought it was really timely to kind of delve into this. And one thing that I'll mention is we tried to piece together parts of the puzzle, mainly from publicly available information. So there's obviously some speculation on in some of the media, and we've also added our own speculation basically towards the end. So it's not, I would say, 100% accurate because it's still in flux, but we thought it'd be a really interesting moment to talk about it. So next slide. So we'll talk basically the discussion today. We'll talk about both, the WhatsApp Pay and Pix, which is the Central Bank of Initiatives initiative, and we'll look at it from 3 main angles: the technology, and then briefly, and then really on the business model and user experience is probably where we want to focus on the most. And then we'll also tie it, and we'll make our own assessment to what extent these are reflecting some of the principles espoused by Level 1, and then just end with what it might mean for the broader Mojaloop community globally. So probably a lot of you are familiar that WhatsApp Pay started in India about a couple of years ago. India is by far WhatsApp's largest market, 400 million users. But so far, it's really been tied up in a lot of the regulatory issues. So it started, it really leveraged the country's UPI infrastructure. There's over 150 banks that have participated, and it was really focused on P2P. It did launch, was able to get about a million users, and then the regulatory trouble started. Right now, so it's not a fair comparison because we're obviously in mid 2020, but Google, Walmart, and Google and Walmart's phone pay system, and then Paytm are basically in the tens of millions. So they're quite behind. Facebook is quite behind in this regard. And the main regulatory issues that it was facing was around data storage outside of India, and then potentially data sharing with the parent company in terms of Facebook. Maria's going to talk about the rest of in terms of what's happening in Brazil. I should mention that we've used the word WhatsApp Pay and maybe interchangeably, but it's been a little bit rebranded more in terms of Facebook Pay, which WhatsApp is using, and we can talk about that a little bit towards the end, but just as a little bit of a note, so that there's no confusion. So Maria, I'll pass it on to you.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Amitabh, for the introduction and for talking a little bit about WhatsApp Pay in India. Yeah, so next, Facebook chose Brazil, which is the second largest market for WhatsApp, with 120 million users, to launch this kind of second iteration of payments via WhatsApp. Now, it's both for P2P transfers as well as P2M payments, targeting small businesses. Brazil has today about 10 million businesses that are in this profile. So in middle of July this year, WhatsApp launched WhatsApp Pay in Brazil, together with 3 banks, 2 credit card providers, and a payment processor. But a week later, the central bank suspended it basically, saying they needed to assess the potential risks to the payment infrastructure in the country. So WhatsApp Pay was seen as a threat to the competitive environment and to a mobile payment space that could work in an interoperable, fast, secure, transparent, open, and cheap manner. There were some speculation that this suspension was also related to the central bank trying to protect PIX, their own interoperable instant payment system. But Roberto Campos Neto, which is the president of the Central Bank of Brazil, rebated this, saying that he sees these are 2 different players, tools in the market. He sees PIX as the engine, and WhatsApp Pay and the kind of like overall setup are the body. And I think it's quite an insight also statement that he gave, saying that anybody has to fit into this engine. So let's explore a little bit more what is like the background of this decision, and dive a little bit deeper on what is WhatsApp Pay and what is PIX, to try to at the end, come up with some conclusions and assessments of what is like at stake and what is happening. I'm gonna start with WhatsApp and the technology aspect. So while in India it was built based on the UPI, in Brazil it's built on existing card payment rails plus the Facebook Pay. Payments can be done with debit and credit card issued by the participating banks. It uses push payment technology and tokenization initiatives by card networks, namely Visa Direct and MasterCard Send for the push payments, and Visa Cloud tokenization and MasterCard digital enablement service for the tokenization initiatives. Facebook will request the payment tokens, which will then be processed by Cielo. Cielo captures, transmits, and settles the transactions. there will be no change in the current clearing and settlement process as it's already happening today outside of WhatsApp Pay, for example. No information has been provided about data ownership, storage, etc. Now, in terms of business model, this payment future can offer Facebook a highly expected revenue stream for WhatsApp. And it's targeting small and micro businesses, and it's connected to the WhatsApp Business dedicated app that has been launched for this profile, and that offers things like a catalog where the small merchants can like show their products for customers. So consumers making payment to businesses or transfers will be able to transact for free. Merchants will need to pay a 3.99 fee per transaction, which is higher than most competing options. Cielo maintains its position as a transaction processor. The card networks remain relevant through tokenization and push payment standards. The issuing banks, which are Banco do Brasil, Nubank, and Cicred in this current setup, are largely kind of like in the background, but content with the additional channel of payments, where I think it's also interesting to say that there might be kind of a transfer from users that today are kind of paying cash, moving to pay digitally. So yeah, just to close, so Facebook is looking to add the commerce feature to complement its Facebook and WhatsApp business platform and become more relevant to these players. But I think that also there might be less interest from Facebook in the revenue from the MDR to interest in the data that they can leverage to offer, to micro-target these merchants and users that are gonna be using the WhatsApp Pay feature. In terms of user experience, first, Brazilians, they love WhatsApp. It's quite impressive to say that the numbers, 99% of all smartphones in Brazil have WhatsApp installed, which is used on a daily basis by 93% of users. So I think that the convenience and ease of use make a payment will be as easy or almost as easy as sharing an image, will play a very large role driving adoption from existing WhatsApp users, bank account and card holders. Now that's our biggest comment, that the prerequisites are quite restrictive. Users need to have a smartphone with the app, a bank account with the participating banks, like the selected banks, and a debit or a credit card. Merchants need to have smartphone and the dedicated app for business, and an account with payment processor Cielo. In terms of, so we touched on the other type of transaction settlement times and costs. And here I wanted to just like highlight before we move to the next slide, what are the restrictions inside of WhatsApp Pay for P2P transactions. So they can only be done with debit cards, with up to 1,000 reais per transaction, 20 transactions per day, and up to 5,000 reais per month. These restrictions are in place to avoid small merchants using P2P for commercial purposes. Now I'm gonna talk a little bit about Pix, which is the Brazilian, the central bank interoperable, instantaneous and low cost payment platform that's planned to be launched in November. So Pix is part of an agenda that's back to the goes back to the beginning of the 2000s to try to fight the Brazilian oligopoly of like 5 banks and 2 credit cards brands. It's been under development for 2 years, since 2018, 2018, together with other industry players. So in the case of PIX, it's the central bank who basically owns the platform, and he's also the kind of manager, operator of it. He's responsible for the transaction liquidation, and he takes care of the user base, reducing risk of competition asymmetry and data leakage. There are two participants types, the direct and the indirect. Direct will settle directly on the platform, settle transactions, and for the indirect will be via the direct participants. Most regulated financial institutions, like commercial banks, will be direct, while non-licensed providers will be indirect. So unlike current systems, transactions will be settled within a few seconds, up to 10 seconds apparently, and available 24 hours, 7 days a week, every day in the week. There is an emphasis on QR code for merchant payments, but it's not the only modality. It will be pretty much up to the industry to explore the potential of the system, which we'll see shortly. In terms of business model, PIX is following a worldwide trend of faster payments. And this is the central bank's initiative to transform the electronic payments in the country together with open banking. Today, there are already over 1,000 institutions to be planned that have already signed up to participate in PIX, to participate in the system. But for some of them, it was actually mandatory. So central bank established that all licensed financial and payment institutions with over 500,000 accounts must participate in PIX and offer the payment option next to other possibilities. So they cannot hide it inside of their app or inside of their online banking website. It needs to be presented vis-a-vis with next to the other options. They will be allowed to define the price, but there will be some kind of control of abuse. And the central bank will charge participants a small fee to cover costs. I think it's very interesting to note that in the PIX model, the card networks and acquirers don't have a place. In terms of user experience, there will be a bit of a learning curve for Brazilians, how to use the different use cases, although QR code is something that, I mean, it's already, some fintechs and some banks are already trying using. But yeah, there will be a little bit of a learning curve to understand what is PIX, how it works, etc. But advantages in terms of enabling access are huge. The prerequisites are relatively low. Any type of account, either at a bank, fintech, or financial institution works. And although it's heavily based on smartphones and QR code in terms of use cases, there are other platforms are possible. Multiple keys are going to be available or possible to be used, from mobile numbers to the CPF, which is the national ID number. Cash withdrawal will be available through participant retailers, and every combination of P, B, and G as well. P2P, B2G, G2P, everything. So it's going to be pretty much also up to the industry to explore these possibilities. Yes, so yeah, timelines will be much quicker with mediated settlement, costs up to the participants, and no restriction. Institutions will define their policies to avoid money laundering, fraud, and terrorism funding. So we try to make kind of like a general overall assessment of to which extent both PIX and WhatsApp Pay are conforming to the desired outcomes from the level 1. I'm going to start with PIX. I think it's pretty straightforward. You might have already sense that PIX is built on very similar basis as the Lab 1 project. and for that reason, it's kind of like scoring pretty well. One thing that I think it's almost like a challenge, and I think it's also for Mojaloop, is that it's still the use of it is at the end of the day is still a very key part to the success of such initiatives. So it depends very much on the players, on their willingness and on their ability to design new services and new products for new customers. So I think that's kind of like one of the maybe like barriers for a platform such as Pix. For WhatsApp Pay, we think the story is a little bit different. It's also a different system, but in a way tries to there are also like enough similarities for us to kind of try to make that assessment. As we said, because it's actually also building on existing kind of financial services structure, the improvement of access is very limited because it's for people that are actually already banked. But I think there could be a relevant move from cash to digital payment enabled through WhatsApp Pay. Financial enablement falls almost like at the same place of financial access. It's still like pretty much based on existing structures, so we don't see why there will be much of a difference. While the participation in digital economy, we think WhatsApp Pay can have a great potential of being an entry point for users that are not confident using a banking app or using a website for. So the ease of use of WhatsApp as a platform they are already using on a daily basis can be a great entering point for them to join the digital economy. So now I'm going to hand over back to Amitabh, who is going to talk about what is like our assessment about the current situation and what do you think is going to kind of happen next, and the most important lessons and considerations for the Mojaloop community.
Great, thanks, Maria. Simeon is giving me a note that we just have a couple minutes, so maybe you can just click through on slide 16, and I'll just quickly go through it. So as Maria said, we'll just talk, our assessment of what's happened, given the description. So I think, the first one is clearly they see it as a threat in terms of, the model that they're working on in terms of Pix. I mean, I think there is an issue about Facebook and also Cielo kind of dominating the market and kind of to the detriment of Pix. We obviously don't know all the different engagement that WhatsApp was having directly with the central bank, but it does seem like there wasn't, let's say, a formal permission, or at least that's the way the central bank is kind of expressing it, that it was kind of somewhat like as a surprise launch. So no doubt there was some engagement, but it probably wasn't enough. So they are now, I think the regulator is still defining how to deal with basically like kind of big tech companies in this scheme. So far, it's been kind of punted to MasterCard and Visa, which has since responded to the central bank and kind of clarifying that Facebook is not storing any data. It's just basically passing on tokens. So it remains to be seen. Remains to be seen what the central bank is going to say. I think the broader kind of strategic picture is that Facebook is looking for kind of greater integration of its apps, starting with commerce. So Facebook, intentionally has not pursued this kind of super app strategy like you have in China. But Mark Zuckerberg has made clear, broadly speaking, that he is looking for greater integration on the family of apps, so Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp, including the core Facebook. So Facebook Pay, which is how it's actually now kind of branded or articulated, is that common thread. In terms of, maybe speculating in the future, we think that, WhatsApp Pay and Pix, and ideally an integration of one to each other, should stimulate the payment sector. So we do think, Pix is by design a low-cost platform, so that should put downward pressure on prices charged to customers for all type of, basically business as usual transactions. Brazil is a very lucrative market, as maybe some of you know. So we do expect payment profit margins for both issuers and acquirers to trend downward. We also think that offering Pix next to credit and debit cards in WhatsApp Pay will be, possibly a requirement to allow the feature in the country, and maybe the flip side as well, that'll be integrated into the Pix infrastructure. So Facebook at the end of the day will probably choose its bank partners to some regard. I mean, there's no guarantee that it'll be accessible to some of the other fintechs. We do think that it makes sense for other banks to root for WhatsApp Pay just to kind of gain traction and join the scheme, because it does preserve that kind of profitable and existing current card infrastructure. And what we do hope is that, the customer stands to benefit, right? So if we do have both Pix and WhatsApp Pay, both of these giants really making initiatives that, if they're, well implemented, at Pix at least is still in kind of design phase, and it'll really kind of shake up the market and encourage more entrants and innovations to flourish. So the last slide is what does this mean for all of us? Particularly as we look at maybe more broadly the kind of big tech coming in. I think the first point is that the payment models are not a one size fits all. So whether it's WeChat and Tencent, whether it's Apple Pay in the US, the models are really quite different in terms of business model and technologies and customer experiences. And even as you saw, WhatsApp in India is kind of looks and feels very differently than in Brazil, based on the existing infrastructure and market conditions that they had to play with. The second one is, regardless of what the big tech is doing, no need to kind of agonize about that. Should be, the Mojaloop infrastructure should be designed with customer needs in mind, which I think it is. So at least on paper, the Pix design is, seems very, very compelling. And I think if it is implemented correctly, then it should be a game changer for Brazilian consumers. So, if and when big tech payment play comes in, then it'll be not seen so much as a direct threat, but more as a competition to kind of be more efficient. And the last point is that hopefully this interoperable payment infrastructure should aim to work with them. So we do hope that if there is an entry, then it is something that could be ultimately integrated into the infrastructure. So that's it for us. I'm not too sure, Simeon, if there's time for questions, but otherwise, on the next slide, you can feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be fine-tuning a couple points in this presentation and then sharing it with the broader community.
Thank you so much, Amitabh. I see a question on Discourse in your session thread. So if you want to jump on there, that would be great. And there are a couple of comments in the chat as well that you could respond to. But thank you so much, Maria and Amitabh, for this really exciting presentation. I want to move on to our next session, which is the supporting multi-part payments in Mojaloop, led by Moses Kusasira and our good friend Michael Richards. Moses, you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Right. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Perfect. All right, let me share my screen. All right. Go to see my screen.
All right, we can see your screen. Go ahead.
All right, perfect. Thanks, everybody. My name is Moses Kusasira, and I'm the CEO of Social Media Gateways. And we develop a few different platforms, including Ssnapp. And today I'm here to talk to you about what we call split payment. And we've been working on this split payment capability for the past couple of years with Mojaloop. And, in the past convenings, we came up with different ways of doing it. But I think this time around, with the help of Michael and his group, we were able to come up with a really solid way of doing it. And that's what we'll go through today. So a quick background on split payment and why split payment is needed. So most of the platforms that we're building, mainly in Africa, are online platforms, which range from e-commerce type of platforms to share economy platforms. And one of the biggest problems that we have with the platforms out there and the merchants that we deal with is the ability to do payments online on those e-commerce platforms in a more easier, simpler way, just because of the mobile payments environment that is around Africa in itself. So the concept is, for example, you have platforms like ticket selling platforms where you have football teams selling out tickets. Now, when somebody buys that ticket from that merchant or from that vendor, say, that vendor, that company is just simply a ticketing company. They basically sell the tickets. However, the money does not all go to that ticketing company. It usually goes to the football team. They take a cut, and in some scenarios, the government also has to take a cut. So that's kind of like one of the examples on why split payment is needed. But also there is things like where you have e-commerce solutions, for example, something like an Amazon, where somebody's buying different products. They're doing one payment, but those payments are supposed to be split to different vendors because the platform is just providing a way for those people to buy those items. You have things like charity, where people are donating a certain amount of money, but the money is split into different vendors. Again, a scenario where somebody is donating money to a kid, to go to school. Some of the money goes to the school, some of the money goes to buying, shoes, buying books, and things like that. So there is quite a need of being able to split the payment and being able to do it in a more easier way. So the goal here is to provide two different type of ways to split a payment. One is where you provide any or all, meaning that when somebody makes that payment to the beneficiaries, if one of the beneficiaries does not accept the payment or it doesn't go through, the whole payment will fail. This is in, for example, the ticketing, version of it, where I'm buying a ticket, but if, let's say, the payment does not go through on the other side, on the vendor side, which is maybe the team itself, the whole payment will fail. So the company that's selling the ticket will not get anything, and neither does the government. And then you have a second scenario where you have all or nothing, where somebody is paying, one-time payment, or the payee is paying one-time payment, and the beneficiaries are receiving on the other end different, percentages from the payment that's paid. And in some cases, maybe one of them does not go through, but the other ones will go through. So the system will come back and tell, the person that's paying, one payment failed, but they'll process the other payments as well. So today we're going to go ahead and dive deep into the ticketing version of it, where it's either going through or it's failing all the way through. And we came up with the way. So initially in the last convening, we had discussed on how to do this from a bulk payments standpoint within Mojaloop itself. But Michael and his group came up with a very, very, a better way of, kind of like one thing that we've been talking about, using PISPs. And it's much easier, it's much cleaner. However, we're going to dive a little bit in, and, there's a few things that they're still kind of lingering around that we have to clean up and see how we can make it all work. So how does this work? So a customer goes to a website or a platform, ticketing platform, and they're buying football, a ticket to a football game, right? Now, let's say this is a game in Tanzania. That ticketing platform itself is taking a certain percentage of that ticket. The football team as well is going to receive, its share of the money. So, and then you have the government that will take tax from that specific ticket, right? So when that person makes that payment, what needs to happen is that our system will initiate the payment, and through Mojaloop, it'll be able to basically split the payment to the 3 different beneficiaries. In this scenario, if any of those beneficiaries basically fails, that whole payment needs to fail. And then the customer needs to get a response back telling them that that payment failed. This is kind of a visual on how we are looking at designing this. And so the idea is that the broker, which basically this is the merchant selling the ticket, when they receive the payment on the first time, they have the percentage, they take out their own percentage, let's say in this example, 10%. And then Ssnapp itself is the one that's passing through the payment from the broker into Mojaloop. And once it gets into Mojaloop, Mojaloop is able to also split the payment through the different vendors, which is the football team in this scenario, and then also the government, taking the government taking tax from that specific payment. Now, we can also get deeper into, does the government take tax from the percentage that has been passed through the football team, or does it take tax from the whole amount, right? And in that portion, that scenario gets a little bit complicated because then also the broker will have to pay tax to the government as well. And this is kind of like what I was explaining. You have the agent, basically the 80% of the amount, let's say if they're paying 1,000 shillings, 80% of the amount will go to the football club, 10% will go to the agent, and then 10% will go to the government. This is in the most simplistic way. Like I said, it can get complicated in the sense of that the government then will decide, okay, we are taking 10% out of the 80%, or we are taking 10% out of the actual full amount. And then this is kind of like the data flow. So it starts all with a payer, where they pay the ticket, and the merchant, which is the platform that's selling the ticket, contacts Ssnapp, which is the PISP, to basically initiate that specific payment. And what Ssnapp does, Ssnapp initiates the payment and sends it to Mojaloop. And in this scenario, what Mojaloop will do, it will contact the payer to just make sure to do a handshake. And think of it, for example, in an M-Pesa environment, this is where a payer will have to enter their PIN. And then that will be sent back to Mojaloop, letting Mojaloop know, okay, this is an authorized amount. And because Ssnapp has already created the different portions of the different vendors within the merchant system, so Ssnapp would send all that information to Mojaloop, including some information about who's receiving this payment on the other end, the vendors, and what percentage are they receiving. So Mojaloop will be able to initiate a handshake from the vendors as well. Say, okay, here is a customer is buying a ticket, and here's the amount that we want to transfer to you. And so there'll have to be a handshake there as well to make sure that the vendor will accept that amount. Now, if any of that fails, Mojaloop will come back and say, okay, one of the vendor failed, so the whole transaction failed, and Ssnapp will let the merchant know that this transaction has failed, basically at that level. Now, if it goes through, then Mojaloop will go ahead and basically send through the different percentages to the different vendors, and with a confirmation back to Ssnapp. And Ssnapp will let the merchant know at that point that, okay, the payment has gone through, then go ahead and sell the ticket, generate the ticket. And this does not show the whole environment as far as what's being sold once the payment has gone through. And once the merchant has got all the information, they'll send the transaction details directly to the vendors as needed. Okay. And I'll go ahead and let Michael jump in here and explain a little bit more technical on the Mojaloop side, because it does get really technical on that side. Michael?
I certainly hope not, Moses, but thank you very much. Okay, so really what we were trying to do here was, when we originally started looking at this as a bulk payment, then we thought the problem with it was that most of the work and setting it up and constructing the application, those sorts of things, will be done by the DFSP. What we wanted to do was to move that so that the actual beneficiary of a good quality application would be the people who were going to actually make the money out of it, in this case, Ssnapp. So we decided to see whether we could use the PISP, Payment Initiation Service Provider functionality that we're currently adding to Mojaloop. Now, you'll be getting a detailed presentation on that from Lewis and JJ tomorrow, so I don't want to eat too much of their lunch, but I'll just go briefly through how we think this would work. So, first of all, when you, as a customer, join a PISP, then you will do a process that we call account linking, and that's really rather like it is if you join PayPal or somebody like that. You have to give the application permission with your bank to access your account. So effectively what you're saying is, as far as I'm concerned, if you get a request from Ssnapp to transfer funds from my account, by all means ask them for confirmation, but in principle, I'm okay with it. Now, this doesn't violate the level 1 principles, because every time an actual transfer happens, I have to validate it. The difference is I validate it on the PISP's application and not on the bank's application. So we assume that we've set all this up nicely. Now then, Moses, can you go ahead? Thank you. We've talked about how this will work, except that in this case, it's the application, the Ssnapp application, which knows which DFSP the customer uses and where to route the payments for tax and commission. So Ssnapp sends a request to my mobile money system, where my account is, saying, please will you send a bulk request, transfer funds in these proportions, which is a standard piece of functionality that we are currently adding to Mojaloop capabilities, except for a couple of modifications. Hit me, Moses. Thank you. First of all, we need to be able to support multiple transfer requests. At the moment, we're supporting P2P, and you can only send a single transfer request, like send 1,000 shillings to Moses. But what we need to be able to do, as you've seen, is to be able to say, I want to send this amount here, that amount there, and that amount there. So the content of the transfer request should reflect the same as it does now for bulk quotations, i.e. where you can say, I want to send this amount, but I want to split it between these participants. Next slide, please. So M-Pesa, in this case, sends out a bulk request for quotation with one part for each party who needs to be credited. This assumes, by the way, that the extensions we're currently working on to support single requests to multiple DFSPs have been implemented. The switch then breaks out the transfer requests and sends one to each payee DFSP, one to the football company's bank, one to the government's bank, and one to Ssnapp's bank. Each DFSP responds with its own quotation and signs it with its own private key. The switch then assembles the responses and sends them back in a nicely tied up bundle with a ribbon on top to the customer's DFSP, in this case to M-Pesa. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, when the quotation response comes back, the payer DFSP, that is M-Pesa, needs to be satisfied that I really am okay with making that payment, even though I'm actually using the Ssnapp application and not their application. So what they do is they send that to the PISP and ask the PISP to confirm that I've approved the transfer. Ssnapp shows me the terms of the transaction and asks me to enter a PIN or a fingerprint or some kind of identification to approve it. Then Ssnapp signs the response to validate it and sends it back to M-Pesa. What happens then, thank you, is that the M-Pesa will check the signature to make sure it's satisfied that this really did come from the PISP using the link that was set up before. And if it did, it will send out a bulk request for transfer with 3 parts, 1 for each party. This assumes that we're going to allow bundling of requests to multiple DFSPs, and we'll also put a new flag on the bulk transfer request. And the flag will say, if it's set, if any transfer fails, that means they should all be cancelled. Switch breaks out the transfer requests, sends one to each creditor party, and each request contains a flag which says to the payee DFSP, to the football team and the government account, don't commit your funds until you receive final confirmation from me. And that means that if anything fails, they will get a confirmation saying, sorry, it's all off, don't commit your funds. Each payee DFSP responds to the switch using the proposed syntax, which is now actually implemented, to say, please confirm when everything's all right. If any payee DFSP says no, then the switch sends a cancellation request to all the payee DFSPs and then back to the payer DFSP. If they all respond positively, then the switch sends to the payer DFSP saying that the transfer was successful, and then to each payee DFSP saying it can clear the funds to the payee accounts. And finally, the switch sends confirmation to the Ssnapp application that the transfer is completed, so that the Ssnapp application can inform its customer that everything's gone all right and the ticket purchase has gone through successfully. Thank you. We look at purchases from multiple suppliers. What we're actually looking at is a cart that has items from a number of vendors. So the customer, as you do on an online shop, makes a single payment for the cart total. Again, this is a multi-part transfer, but in this case, if any part fails, the other parts should still succeed. It's like a salary payment. The accounts may belong to different DFSPs, and what we'd really like is that the payment appears on the customer's statement as a single payment. We'd like that on the ticket purchase as well. We would like it to appear as 1 payment rather than 3, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. Next, please. So again, the customer wants to make a payment using the PISP application. Each payee DFSP quotes independently, as we saw before. Each payee postpones commitment of its funds until it's notified by the switch. The payer is then notified of the success of the overall payment. And in this case, there's a little wrinkle. We assume that Ssnapp, charitable as it is going to want to make a little money out of this and that they will make a commission. But what we would like to do is to have that commission chargeable only on successful payments, not on unsuccessful payments. So that if, let's say, Ssnapp charges 1% on transfers and 2 of the transfers fail, they shouldn't get the commission on the funds that fail. Next, please. So additional functionality that we want, apart from what we've already seen on here, is, first of all, we'd like the payment to appear as a single payment, as I said. And second, we want the market maker to be payable so that the commission's variable by recipient, so that different merchants can have different commission rates, for instance, depending on the volume of business that they do. Commission is only taken for successful payments, and the customer is only charged for a commission which was taken. And finally, I think, yes, any questions? Right on time. I hope you're impressed with me, Simeon.
I am very impressed. Thank you so much, Michael. I see a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Do you want to go through them and then maybe answer 1 or 2? Then we
yeah, hold on. Let me take a look.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I kiss the rod, Neil. I will respond to that. So, how is it different from bulk payment? Sudhir says. It is like bulk payment, except that that has certain wrinkles. Now, in a normal bulk payment, like a salary payment, for instance, I pay $25,000. Moses gets 5,000, Adrian gets 5,000, Simeon gets 5,000, and so on. But if any of those payments don't go through, then everybody still gets paid. In the ticket example, we can only have things we can only allow the payment if every part of it succeeds. So for instance, if the football team can accept the payment and Ssnapp can accept the payment, but the government doesn't accept the payment, then the whole payment has to fail. And that's the difference between an ordinary bulk payment and the kind of payment that we're talking about. If that doesn't meet your answer your question, then by all means stick your hand up and I will be happy to carry on and do it in more detail. Lewis says, of course, a really nice design for which I am mostly indebted, of course, to Lewis and JJ. Yes, request to pay to bulk transfers is the difference. All or nothing is also a difference. The other difference, there are two further differences that we want to be able to design. First of all, to be able to charge a variable commission by payment so that we can say, okay, we only charge commission for the payments that went through and not for the ones that didn't, which means we can't have it as a single payment, for instance, to Ssnapp. And the second point is we would like this to appear on the customer's statement as if it were a single payment. So it just says, I bought a football ticket for Kinondona FC. What I don't want to see is something that says, well, you know, I paid some money to Kinondona FC and I paid some money to the government and I paid some money to Ssnapp. So those are the two extra things apart from those, the two that you correctly identify that we would need to sort out. But otherwise, of course, it is the trenchant analysis that I would expect from someone like Lewis.
Thanks for that response, Michael. I'll pause it there. And Moses, do you have any thoughts to wrap up?
This is great. I mean, really excited to see this design. I think it's much cleaner. And if we can figure out a way of making sure that the customer or the payer is getting one transaction, that will solidify everything, you know, because that's the key. It needs to appear that they're making one payment. You know, everything else is done within the PISP, you know, in this case, Ssnapp or Mojaloop.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Moses. I think we'll end that session there. We have one more session before our break. The next session is lessons learned from the 40 Days, 40 Fintechs initiative. This will be led by Innocent Kawooya. Innocent, you ready to go?
Oh yeah, thank you, Simeon.
Sure, go ahead. Do you want to share your presentation?
Hi everyone. I bring you greetings from Uganda, from East Africa, and from Africa. I'm glad to be here, and I'm happy for the progress that we're having. I don't know whether John Mark is on call. Yeah, I request that he chips in at some point. We were blessed. COVID helped us. It kept him in Uganda for 40 days. So somehow he helped us to chip in. Yeah, COVID helped. Hey.
If you want to close that window on the right side of your screen.
Oh yeah,
with the
sure.
images.
I'm excited about presenting. So
good, thank you.
Yeah, that's okay now. So thank you. Let me start right away. My name is Innocent Kawooya, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Hi People. Hi People, as a company that started about 15 years ago in Uganda, is keen to promote secure digital financial services because of their vital role in promoting financial inclusion. Part of the things we do is we work with fintechs, we work with women in technology, with developer companies, with mobile network operators, with banks, with DFSPs, regulators, policymakers, government, political, economic, and socio-economic systems and institutions to make sure that every single day we play a role in helping the world achieve full financial inclusion. We also support early stage fintech companies and developer companies in creating an ecosystem for these initiatives that allows them to openly and easily innovate. And in the end, we promote innovative trends that they are creating. Part of the things we've been doing this year is the 40 days for the fintechs. But before I go to that, I'll also be glad to mention that High People this year received an ED certification that allows us to operate as a charity under a name High People Foundation Limited, but we operate as High People, the brand. So that's a screen that is showing. We have about 6 activities that run every year. As you see on the screen, we've been running for the last 2 months, the 40 days for the fintechs that culminated into the Fintech Landscape Exhibition. And we'll be going ahead with events in September and October and November, and that is the Women in Fintech Hackathon, the Women in Fintech Summit, the Include Everyone Summit that we ideally call the Digital and Financial Inclusion Summit, and then the 7th edition of the Digital Impact Awards Africa. I'll go straight away to the 40 days for the fintechs. A reason why we decided to start running the 40 days for the fintechs is to create a level playing field. Part of our inspiration comes from the establishment and the efforts of Mojaloop and its founding members and its sponsors and partners, thinking of creating a platform of collaboration, an open platform of collaboration. I think if I remember very well, I actually did the mention of something like this last year in December at the Fintech Connect conference in London, talking about the beauty of having an initiative like Mojaloop that helps us as the world in finance think about collaborating openly, because before no one ever thought of saying we should operate and work together, we should create a level playing field for all of us to discuss. And I believe the 40 days for the fintechs has great testimonies from the players. I believe now more than ever we should be collaborating. So the primary purpose was to make sure that we shine a spotlight on prime stories in financial technology that are transforming millions of lives. But we ended up having different other participants. Of course, we couldn't do this alone. We were supported directly by Mojaloop Foundation with knowledge and a lot of resources for information to facilitate different fintechs, Modus Box and CrossLex technologies. The initiative is all run under a program called Include Everyone at High People. The screen here summarizes a bit of the things that happened. As you may see on Mojaloop as well, hashtag trended for 2 days when we're running our final event. The hashtag 40 days for the fintechs was trending all the time for 40 days, 41 days or 43. But part of the things that we had as activities is we did run 38 physical events. That means we had meetings with different fintechs for 38 different days. We had webinars of about five companies, one of which was Coin from Tunisia, Manjara from Zambia. We had SoftPay from Cameroon and others that all participated in the 40 days for the fintechs. We had 41 amazing days of TV showcase of fintech stories. Every day we're happy and we're thankful to God that we're able to have each fintech feature and tell their story to the communities that they serve. We had 8 hours of live TV for the culmination on national TV, that is NTV and Smart Television. We had fintechs a headline in different news stories and features around. We were able to, for the first time, create 8 news or website stories for each fintech. And that's roughly a total of about 328 news stories. They are all available and we shall share them online very soon. We did very great sensitizing of fintechs about level 1 project principles. And we're very delighted to see that a number of the fintechs were actually practicing or adapting with one or two of the principles, the level 1 project principles. Of course, we had tweets that I'm sure you've been seeing, 24 tweets for each fintech, and they're all very excited. I would actually request those that participated in the 40 days for the fintechs, and if you're on call, to send a shout with a hashtag in the chat room, hashtag 40 days for the fintechs. We had a lot of impact created thanks to the initiative. There is a poll that I request to also contribute to right now that is happening and have your opinion. And so we had so much happening. The next slide talks about the interesting statistics that we had as a result of the 40 days for the fintechs initiative, part of which was getting to understand that we actually have about 67 operating fintechs in Uganda, having an annual growth rate of 35% for the last 2 years. Payments among the fintechs in Uganda is the largest and is processing more than 19 trillion shillings. That is roughly about $5.3 billion. That is by statistics of 2019 and gathered from the fintechs. Banking, digital banking infrastructure, banking APIs, investment, saving, lending, and merchants are the next biggest sectors for fintech. As a part of the statistics, 60% of the fintechs in Uganda are actually Ugandan and indigenous. They were born here and they are growing here. 21% are serving the sub-Saharan market, and then 19% are international fintechs that came in to operate and have operations in Uganda. Of course, Africa today speaks to more than 380 fintechs. I'm sure there are a bit more, but we have to find out about that. And more than 150 fintechs over the last 4 years have received more than $100 million of funding and investment from the global communities. Part of the key and interesting statistics that we also found out was the fact that East Africa operates with more than 16 million SMEs. And it is our goal and our target to make sure that within the next 3-4 years, we make sure that at least each of these SMEs receive their first digital payment. And we believe that partly Mojaloop will play a very major role in achieving this. Yeah. And let me move to the next slide. Yeah, still I have statistics going and breaking down to the 40 days for the fintechs. As you may see, the pie chart shows the fintechs and how they participated, showing that 27% of the fintechs that participated were actually established between 2019 and this year. 15% of them were established between 2000 and 2007. So that means those are more than 14 years old. And then 34% were established between 2010 and 2015. And then 24% were established between 2016 and 2018. So as you may see, majority of the fintechs were established after 2010. So majority of them are only celebrating their 10th anniversary, or others are just about 5 or 2 years, but they're very excited and they're very energetic teams. The number of fintechs that we interacted with, 26 of them were operating within one country, and that is Uganda. 4 of them are operating in 2 countries, 3 are operating in 3 countries, 2 are operating in 4 countries, and then 6 of them are operating in more than 5 countries. Below are the countries from which the fintechs that we interacted with come from as their head offices. That is Uganda, 36 of them, Kenya, and these 41 fintechs, because we were saying we should have 40 fintechs, but we ended up having an extra one, and that is 41, directly employing 1,644 members of staff directly in 45 different countries around Africa, and 42% of the people they employ are actually women. We're excited to host one of the fintechs that is typically 100% women. I think it is called Mindset Coders. And these are the thoughts qualitatively gathered. As I noted, part of the things we did in the 40 days for the fintechs is we documented every story on video. So we went down to do a qualitative analysis of the information and feedback of the 41 fintechs as given out or as aired on TV by the leaders of each team that we engaged with about Mojaloop, and these are their thoughts. As you may see, 46% of the 41 fintechs say they're excited that they have an open source to help on interoperability. 26% believe that Mojaloop will help them cut costs and develop interoperable payment solutions easily. 75.6% of the 41 fintech leaders say that they were very excited and thankful, but also very eager to learn more and see how they can adapt and contribute. And they're also looking forward to learn more about the next steps of Mojaloop and how they can adapt. Then 2.4% said they were already implementing something similar to Mojaloop, and maybe they could learn something or two from Mojaloop. And then 26.8% said they were eager to contribute and support. These are some of the fintechs that were operating in more than 5 countries. They are a bit more established and have a lot to do. We had great testimonials, one of which comes from our cabinet minister of ICT, who says that she was very excited and gratified to know that the 40 Days for the Fintechs was actually a private sector-led initiative that is helping promote leading financial technology companies. We were very excited for feedback from one of the participants, and that's True African, who came in and after 3 days of engaging them and said that when we wrote stories and shared their story, they got business from Standard Bank in South Africa. And they're very thankful to 40 Days for the Fintechs, to High People, and to our partners that made this happen. The next slide talks about the different challenges that we were able to put down together after having our discussions throughout the different engagements with the fintechs. First is, of course, there is still a lot of mistrust of the fintechs and the technology itself. So it is our role as High People and other players like us and other global players to make sure we run as many activities that help the communities and the consumers to actually gain more confidence in using digital financial services. Some of them lack facilities like reliable data centers. Most of the new fintechs are actually startups, and by any chance are facing the real issues that are associated with any kind of startups. Of course, it is true, and we've been talking about it even around the community, that there is there are limited APIs from key players in the industry, so that is a very disturbing challenge for the players. The costs and taxes of mobile money are also slowing down penetration of digital financial services. Then there is limited awareness of services such as merchant payments. A number of operators, the mobile network operators and the banks have been trying to create some merchant solutions, and the fintechs as well. But the end user is not yet understanding exactly what they're supposed to be. So I believe as we run these initiatives, we're also going to support in creating some messaging and communication that helps the users to actually understand that these services exist. Of course, regulation still makes it hard for startups, and the next point also talks about regulation, and most of the fintechs actually agreed to working with the tier KYC to help them create minimum entry regulations that allow them to have different users get financial services, even with limited identification and all kind of stuff. Of course, the issues of price wars within themselves as the fintechs, and then there is a growing issue of the big fintechs wanting to do it themselves, or maybe the banks are starting their own fintechs, the telecoms, and all that. So that was part of it. There are also challenges of lack of financing and capital to carry out expansions locally and internationally by the fintechs. It was highlighted by a number of them. And then some of them are finding it very hard to come out with innovative ways to reach out to communities, especially in rural areas, and be able to serve them sustainably. So we pledge to them that we will sit together and create maybe monthly engagements that help us brainstorm very easily. At least we are thankful that most of the fintechs that participated, if not all of them, believe that an initiative like 40 Days for the Fintechs helps to create a trusted playing field and an engagement point where they are able to freely discuss and talk about their challenges and issues, and we're able to find some solutions in real time. Of course, there is an issue of devices that was raised by almost every other integrator, saying, oh, men are still owners of phones in rural areas. So we need to have some campaigns driven to men understanding when a woman has a phone, they are not actually going to cheat or do anything. So that was something that was highlighted. I talked about the ID penetration and us thinking of having a discussion maybe soon with the National Identification Authority in Uganda and other countries that is nearer, and see how we get to have a meeting point and have maybe the fintechs have access to an API to validate especially identities. There is an issue of limited credit scoring, and then there is a very, very big issue of USSD infrastructure that is still very costly for all the fintechs. Like literally all of them said it is very, very, very costly for them. There is still some limitedness in IT infrastructure and connectivity. And then there is a growing need and lack of cyber insurance packages to help the fintech scale a little bit easier. Some of the current opportunities that we have, there is availability of resources. For instance, like I noted earlier, that many of these fintechs are actually being adapting or making use of understanding one of the level 1 project principles, especially the real-time settlement. So there's a lot of resources, and I believe it's a very important opportunity. We are supposed to play our role as advocates to make sure, and other players to make sure that we share this information, the World Bank publications and all that. But I mean, for us, we have to make sure we continually do this. And I believe everyone and every member of the community can do the same and start from the resources that are available on Mojaloop platform and share with everyone that they can. There is growing demand for mobile banking services, so that is an opportunity. The merchant space is growing because businesses are starting to accept merchant payments. We did a study of informal women in markets and how they're adapting to merchant payments. We shall present that later, maybe in the next sessions later in the year. There is a very fast growth of e-commerce, so it's a very great opportunity. And then the public sector is also starting to demand for electronic services. So that is also another very important opportunity. And the COVID situation of working from home actually for some reason created an advantage and helped to market digital services in Uganda, for example. So the demand might easily grow. Internet is becoming a little bit more affordable, so it's an opportunity that we can leverage as players in financial technology. And then there is a high or fast rising literacy rates for digital financial services, especially for mobile money. And then there's a large pool of talented professionals. The guys and the fintechs that we engaged with throughout for the 41 days were really very interesting and have very innovative ideas of how they can solve the problems. The other very important opportunity is the fact that we have a platform to speak about interoperability, and we have a solution like Mojaloop that we believe should be able to help in so many ways. The screen shows a list of the fintechs that we engage. We created something that we can ideally call the Fintech Wall of Fame. For the first time, for many of the fintechs, maybe more than 70% of them were able to have the same establishment, be in the same level ground. And we ended up, the pictures you see here show you each different team that we engaged on a different day. It was quite tiresome, but very amazing. So much learning for all of us and the team, as you may see. So what happened in the end is the 40 days for the fintechs had to culminate into what we call the Fintech Landscape Exhibition. And this was a very amazing platform. Unlike all the other days, even all the participants this time came dressed to the event. They came dressed ready for a red carpet, but we had a blue one. So it was quite an exciting event. As you may see, the screen here shows you part of the panelists that we had, great women that spoke to the many challenges that that we are facing and women are facing. We are glad and we are blessed to have two chief guests, and one of whom was the Honorable Minister of ICT and National Guidance, and she's called Honorable Judith Nabakoba, and then the State Minister for Public Service, Honorable David Karubanga, who also happens to be the patron of High People. We had a keynote speaker from one of the pioneers and giants in financial technology in Uganda, and that is Ronald Azire. He's the MD for Pegasus. Actually, they were the first implementers of interoperability in Uganda before the telecoms did their own. So he did a very good delivery of a message that was we believe was very important for all the fintechs that participated. As you may see, it was a beautiful event, and everyone should have had a very memorable day. We had 6 panel discussions in 2 days, all live on TV, 3 every day, and 31 panelists. I'll take you through the pictures, the highlights of the panels. That was a financial inclusion for women panel. As you may see, it was an all-women panel, and Arnold did the moderation. This was the panel, the state of e-commerce in Uganda and Africa. This one was about democratizing and digitizing savings and credit services. This was about financial technology for SMEs in COVID times. Then we had to speak to how safe open source is for financial services. I was also glad to be part of the panelists with Pegasus, with Craft Silicon and Kanzu Code. And then this one was about the state of financial technology, also having someone from the regulator side, and that is NITA speaking to the same. Like I said, we had a lot of media coverage. Those are cameras that were covering us live. So we are very happy that for most of us and the fintechs were all able to be live on TV for 2 days to talk about the stories that are transforming millions of lives. As you may see, we had print coverage. Those about 6 different coverages in national papers. That's the New Vision, Daily Monitor, and the Weekly, the Observer. Screenshots here show you national TVs, UBC, NTV, Smart 24, all with different screenshots showing the different activities. The video resources for all the 41 fintechs that we engaged with this year are all available on our YouTube channel, so you can always check out for High People, include everyone. How can the community support? We still need support for our next events and the next activities. We need technical support. We need judges, mentors, and facilitators. We need to have a test environment and an innovation environment, maybe a sandbox and all that, to make sure we are able to have the next engagement and all these fintechs test out and see how helpful and how important Mojaloop can be for them. What's next? We continue to engage the fintechs, and before I talk about the next thing, maybe I request John Mark to say something, because I was becoming a dictator of some sort. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, Innocent.
Yeah.
Thank you. I would say I was personally privileged to be part of the initiative, and like you introduced, COVID made it possible that I was in Uganda for about 40 days. But importantly, the message I could say is that it was very enlightening to hear the fintech's interpretation of level 1 principles. When I sit where I sit, which is largely in a telco setting, leading mobile money across Africa, there are some things that we take for granted. Things like same-day settlement. Sometimes fintechs come to us and they want their reports, their settlement same days. But when you sit where you are and you think you are big, you don't really understand the pain or the reasons why this is very instrumental. So during these events, these fintechs were able to articulate, to tell you why they are serving a market player, a lady selling goods worth maybe $10. The lady stocks goods in the morning, has restock at the end of the day. So if you give this lady a product and then you're telling them, I give you your payment the next day, literally they're not going to use your digital financial service. Elements around the KYC, how it's inclusive for savings, lending, and where things fail.
So they were able to articulate these elements from a real market perspective. My take is that we need more of these engagements. While many of these fintechs were doing some of these things in relation to level 1 principles, unknowingly, a formalization, an education, an engagement that actually gets all the stakeholders to appreciate these principles will be very important for Uganda and the rest of Africa. That will make it possible that all fintechs that are designing products will be looking into the things of tiered KYC, same-day same settlement, real-time transfer. They'll be looking at fraud. Many times we asked fintechs their approach to fraud, and many of them were not having a clear approach to fraud. Of course, from a telco perspective, we have fraud as a very important element of consideration in all the products. But fintechs need to then look into this from a level 1 principle perspective. The element of Mojaloop, personally, I've been privileged to be part of a team that has implemented Mojaloop for the last 2 or 3 years. We've been doing the Mwali project, but I had never been out there to get perspectives of fintechs and how they see Mojaloop being important for them. This event, these engagements gave me that perspective. And even they have very interesting ideas of how aggregators could use Mojaloop, of how you could see Mojaloop being used even as a reference for design improvement. Someone may not necessarily use the Mojaloop code, but they can use Mojaloop to learn about API specification. So the project was very insightful, and I believe we can even get it to another level with the ongoing engagements over the next month or the next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Marc. Maybe I will somewhere at a stage of what's next. So thank you, Jean-Marc, about that. And we are continuing with our activities. And next is the Women in Fintech Hackathon and Summit. So I urge all the committee members to look out for this engagement, and we'll be running this between 12th and 18th of September. We shall have a hackathon for 6 days, and we shall have the summit, the final event. In October, we shall have the 7:30 Awards Africa. So we look forward to all your support. I will take back to an engagement that relates with the women in fintech. I had request the community for the last convening to give opinion about women leadership in fintech companies, and so we resolved to having the fintech having teams that are women-led as priority, based on the results that we found that 88% of the members believe that women leadership is important for creating financial solutions for women. So this is part of how the Women in Fintech Hackathon will be happening. But to save some time, I will not go to that. The Digital Impact Awards Africa and that, all this is available. So maybe I'll lastly be saying our thanks and on behalf of all the fintechs to our sponsors, the Gates Foundation. We're very glad that we have your support and the partnership, and to all our partners, to Mojaloop Foundation, to Modusbox, and to Crosslex Technologies. We thank you, and we thank all the fintechs that participated. And we look forward to seeing this happening. And I hope we're able to run this support together in achieving full financial inclusion as the world. Unless if you have any question, I thank you for attentively listening in and following my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Innocent. Excellent presentation. For all our attendees, Megan has posted a link in the chat. If you want to dig into the with some questions or thoughts on that presentation, you can go to the discourse link there and post a couple of your thoughts. The presentation deck is already up on the agenda. That's mojaloop.io/Dex. Dex is DECKS. We've got 2 sessions to go in this particular day. But before we go into the two sessions, we'll take a break, a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back at 10 minutes past the hour with the settlement and control session led by Rob Reeve and Michael Richards. I'm sure Michael does not, I'm sure most of you do not mind hearing Michael's voice again. So we'll be back at 10 minutes past the hour.